The alien connection. The hum of the Terran shuttle filled the air as it descended through Earth's atmosphere, its sleek silver body cutting through the sky like a glimmering spear. Inside, Dr. Kelia, a renowned Kylok scientist, stood by the viewing window, her hands clasped behind her back. Her dark iridescent scales caught the dim interior light of the craft, reflecting the blues and greens of Earth's surface below. The sight of this lush, chaotic world stirred something deep within her, an emotion she had no name for. For years, she had studied human biology from a distance. She had combed through data, read countless reports, and conducted sterile experiments in controlled environments. But now, for the first time, she was here, on the edge of something much more intimate. The Kylok High Council had authorized her to embark on this mission to Earth, an experiment to understand human reproduction, something her people had long considered primitive but mysterious. But Kelia had chosen to go further than simple observation. She had insisted on immersing herself fully into this experience. She needed to understand why humans had survived and thrived in environments far more hostile than her own kind, why their chaotic emotional bonds seemed to strengthen their species over generations, and most of all, why their reproductive methods were so deeply intertwined with their emotions. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud on a lush green field outside the research facility, and the door hissed open. Warm, humid air rushed into the cabin, carrying with it the scent of earth, fresh grass, damp soil, the faint trace of saltwater from the nearby coast. Kelly's antenna twitched, adjusting to the flood of sensory input. She was used to the cold, sterile environments of the Kylok research stations, where the air was clean and the surroundings were predictable. Earth was chaotic in every way. As she stepped onto the platform, the ground felt strange beneath her feet, softer than she expected. Her wide, reflective eyes scanned the area, taking in the humans who stood waiting for her, a group of scientists, mostly male, dressed in simple uniforms. But one figure stepped forward from the group, drawing her attention. Dr. Ethan Blackwell, head of the Human Bioexchange Program, stood tall with an easy confidence. His dark hair was tousled slightly by the wind, his warm brown skin glistened with the faint sheen of sweat, and his eyes, sharp yet kind, met hers with a mix of curiosity and respect. He extended his hand, a human gesture of greeting that Kelia had studied in theory but never experienced. "Welcome to Earth, Dr. Kelia," Ethan said, his voice calm and steady, though she could hear the subtle undercurrent of excitement in his tone. "I've been looking forward to working with you." Kelia hesitated for a fraction of a second before extending her own hand, her slender, four-fingered limb contrasting sharply with his. His touch was warm, too warm in fact, compared to the cool-blooded physiology of her species. The sensation surprised her, but she kept her composure, her face an unreadable mask of professionalism. "Thank you, Dr. Blackwell," she replied, her voice carrying the calm, measured tone of someone who had spent her life in scientific research. "I am eager to begin my work on understanding your species' reproductive processes." Ethan's eyebrows raised slightly, and she noticed a few of the other human scientists exchanging glances. It was a reaction she had expected. Humans, with their complex emotional entanglements, often found it difficult to separate the act of reproduction from the deeply personal and often messy connections they formed with one another. "Yes, well," Ethan cleared his throat, an awkward smile crossing his lips. "I'm sure we'll get to that soon enough, but first, let's get you settled in. Earth can be overwhelming for newcomers." As they walked through the research facility, Kelia found herself distracted by the constant stimuli that surrounded her. The colors were so vibrant, the sounds so varied, and the air was thick with unfamiliar smells. She had read that human sensory input was heightened in comparison to most other species, but experiencing it firsthand was far more intense than she had anticipated. "This world is chaotic," she remarked, her voice tinged with awe as they passed through a corridor lined with windows offering a panoramic view of the surrounding landscape. Trees swayed in the wind, their leaves shimmering in the golden light of Earth's sun, and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore echoed faintly through the air. Ethan chuckled softly, glancing at her with a look of amusement. "Yeah, Earth has that effect on people. It's messy, unpredictable, but that's what makes it unique. Kelly's mind raced as she absorbed his words. Could it be that this very chaos was the key to understanding human reproduction? Their emotional intensity, their unpredictable nature, was this what allowed their species to adapt and thrive in such harsh conditions? Later that evening, Kelly sat in her quarters, her slender fingers dancing across the holographic interface of her workstation. The data she had collected so far was intriguing, but it was not enough. She had watched humans bond emotionally and physically, but she still did not fully understand the depth of their connections. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime signaling an incoming message. A holographic screen materialized in front of her, displaying a message from the research team. Subject: Invitation to participate in reproductive study. Kelly's pulse quickened as she read the details. The humans had agreed to let her not only observe their reproductive behaviors but also, if she so wished, participate in a controlled study. Her heart rate raced. This was her chance. She had always believed that true understanding required first-hand experience, and now that opportunity was in front of her. The next morning, Kelly found herself standing in a sterile laboratory, watching a human couple interact through a one-way observation window. They were laughing, their hands brushing against each other with an intimacy that was foreign to her. She had studied the hormonal responses of humans, the biological reactions to physical touch, but there was something else here, something deeper than mere biology, something that defied her understanding. Ethan stood beside her, his arms crossed, watching her as much as he watched the couple. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. Kelly frowned, her gaze never leaving the couple. "There's a level of connection here that I didn't expect," she admitted. "It's more than just physical." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Exactly. Humans bond on emotional, psychological levels. It's messy, but it's what makes us." Kelly's gaze softened as she considered his words. There was something about this connection, something intangible but powerful, that intrigued her more than anything else she had studied. And for the first time, she realized that if she was going to truly understand it, she would need to go beyond observation. "I need to experience it myself," she said, her voice firm with resolve. Ethan turned to her, surprised. "You what?" "I need to understand this fully," she repeated, her alien eyes locking with his. "Not just from an observer's perspective. For the sake of science, I must participate." Ethan blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. He studied her face, searching for any sign of hesitation, but her expression was serious, determined. "Kelly, this isn't just an experiment. What you're asking for is more than just scientific understanding. It's personal." Kelly nodded, acknowledging the weight of his words. "I am aware, but for too long, my people have treated this subject as mere data. If we are to truly understand humans, what connects them, what drives their survival, then I must experience it firsthand." Ethan's stomach tightened at her words. It was one thing to discuss human emotions and reproduction in the abstract, but Kelly was suggesting something far more profound. And as much as he admired her drive, he knew this would change things between them. He had seen the way she looked at the data, how her fascination had grown over the weeks, but this was different. "I don't think you fully understand what you're asking," Ethan said slowly, his voice laced with concern. "This isn't just about hormones or chemicals. It's not something you can turn on and off. Emotional connections, real ones, can change you." She tilted her head, her curiosity piqued by the warning in his voice. "You're afraid it will affect me?" "I'm afraid it will affect both of us," Ethan admitted, his eyes searching hers. For a moment, silence hung between them, the weight of their conversation settling like a thick fog. The sounds of the couple in the next room, laughing, whispering, sharing stolen moments, faded into the background. Kelly stepped closer to Ethan, her gaze never leaving his. "I trust you, Ethan," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with determination. "If I am to understand, I want to do so with you." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't anticipated this, hadn't expected the logical, methodical scientist to step into such vulnerable territory. But the sincerity in her words, the quiet intensity in her gaze, left him breathless. "You're asking for something more than just an experiment," Ethan said, his voice low, filled with unspoken tension. "I am," Kellia whispered, her voice steady. "This is the next step, the line I must cross to truly understand." The air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities, the tension palpable. And as they stood on the precipice of something unknown, something deeply personal, Ethan realized that this was no longer just about science. This was about them. The sterile hum of machinery filled the dimly lit observation room as Dr. Kellia stood at the large one-way glass, her wide, reflective eyes fixed on the scene playing out in the adjoining chamber. Her iridescent scales shimmered faintly under the pale glow of the observation lights, and her antennae twitched slightly in response to the atmospheric conditions around her. Earth was still new to her, the dense air, the humidity, the unpredictable shifts in temperature, and everything about this planet felt chaotic. But it wasn't just the environment that unsettled her. It was the humans in the next room. A human couple sat close together, laughing softly, their hands intertwining with ease. Their movements seemed instinctive, natural, as if they had rehearsed this dance of touching closeness 1,000 times. Kellia's gaze narrowed as she observed every subtle shift in their posture, every glance exchanged, and every touch that sent visible ripples of warmth between them. To her, this was all foreign, perplexing. Kylok physiology didn't have space for such emotions, such unnecessary vulnerability. And yet, as she watched them, she couldn't deny the pull of curiosity. She had studied human reproductive biology for years, but observing it in theory was vastly different from what she saw before her now. The way the human male leaned closer to the female, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The way the female responded with a smile, her eyes softening, her body relaxing, as if that single gesture conveyed a world of meaning. There was a deep intimacy to these actions, one that Kellia had not anticipated. In Kylok society, reproduction had long been reduced to a mechanical process, optimized for efficiency and survival. The emotional entanglements that humans seemed to thrive on were seen as distractions, unnecessary complications that weakened logic and productivity. Yet here they were, these primitive beings, creating bonds through their emotions, bonds that seemed to strengthen their connection, their survival, in ways Kellia was only beginning to comprehend. As the couple continued their quiet exchange, Dr. Ethan Blackwell stood beside her, his arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. His presence had become a steady constant since her arrival on Earth, a grounding force in the chaos she found herself immersed in. He had guided her through human culture, explained their social structures, and patiently answered her endless questions about their biology. But even he couldn't fully explain what Kellia now found so compelling about this simple, mundane interaction between two humans. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked softly, his voice cutting through the silence between them. He glanced at her, noticing the way her brow furrowed slightly as she continued to observe the couple. Kellia remained quiet for a moment, her mind racing to process the complexity of what she was seeing. "It's more than I expected," she admitted, her voice carrying the weight of her confusion. "I've studied human reproduction extensively, but what I'm seeing here, it's not just physical. There's something deeper, something I can't quite define." Ethan nodded, his gaze following hers to the couple. "That's because humans don't just reproduce for survival," he explained. "For us, reproduction is deeply tied to emotional bonds, to connection. It's messy, unpredictable, but it's what makes us who we are." Kellia's antenna twitched at his words, signaling her growing curiosity. "Emotions," she repeated, almost to herself. "We Kyloks have long considered emotions a weakness, something to be controlled or eliminated. They cloud judgment, interfere with logical decision-making." "Maybe," Ethan agreed, turning to face her more fully. "But for humans, emotions are also a strength. They drive us, push us to connect, to protect each other. They're what make us fight for survival, not just as individuals but as a species." Kelly's reflective eyes met his, and for a moment, the observation room felt impossibly small. The sterile environment, the hum of the equipment, and the distant sounds of the research facility all seemed to fade into the background as she processed his words. Her mind, trained for precision and logic, struggled to reconcile the idea that emotions, something so unpredictable and uncontrollable, could be the key to human survival. "I need to understand it," she said finally, her voice firm with resolve. "I've been observing from a distance, but it's not enough. If I'm to truly grasp the depth of this connection, this bond that drives human reproduction, I need to experience it myself." Ethan's breath caught at her words, and for a moment, he wasn't sure he had heard her correctly. "You're saying you want to participate?" he asked, his voice tinged with surprise. Kelly nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Yes. As a scientist, I cannot draw conclusions based solely on observation. I need to immerse myself in the process, to feel what humans feel, to understand why emotions play such a pivotal role in your reproductive behavior." Ethan blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. "Kelly, that's..." He paused, searching for the right words. "That's crossing a line. You can't treat this like just another experiment. What you're talking about, it's personal, intimate." Kelly tilted her head, her curiosity piqued by the hesitation in his voice. "Personal? You mean beyond the biological aspect?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yes, reproduction for us isn't just about biology or ensuring the survival of our species. It's about forming connections, about trust, vulnerability. It's complicated. It's not something you can analyze the way you would a chemical reaction." For the first time, Kelly hesitated. She had never considered the possibility that emotions could complicate things in such a profound way. To her, everything was data, measurable, analyzable, logical. But now, standing in this small room, watching a human couple exchange soft smiles and whispered words, she realized that this was something far beyond her realm of understanding. She turned back to the glass, her gaze fixed on the couple once more. The human male had placed his hand gently on the female's cheek, his thumb brushing softly across her skin. It was a simple gesture, but the way the female leaned into his touch, the way her eyes fluttered closed, spoke volumes. It wasn't just about physical attraction, it was about trust, connection, something far deeper than she had anticipated. "I trust you, Ethan," Kelly said suddenly, her voice quiet but resolute. "If I am to experience this, I want to do it with someone I trust." Ethan's heart skipped a beat at her words. He had seen Kelly's fascination grow over the weeks they had spent together, but he hadn't expected this, hadn't expected her to cross this line. And yet, as he looked into her reflective eyes, he could see the sincerity in her gaze. This wasn't just about science anymore, it was personal. "Kelly, are you sure?" he asked softly, stepping closer to her. "This isn't just an experiment. If we do this, there's no going back." She nodded, her decision made. "I'm sure." The weight of her words settled between them, the air in the room thickening with unspoken tension. Ethan had always admired Kelly's intellect, her drive, but this was different. This was real, raw, and deeply intimate. He had to be sure she understood what she was asking for. "This could change things between us," Ethan warned, his voice low and serious. "It's not just about research." Kelly's gaze softened, and for the first time since her arrival on Earth, she allowed herself to feel the weight of her own emotions. "I know," she whispered. "But I need to understand, and I trust you to guide me through this." Ethan exhaled slowly, his mind racing with the implications of what lay ahead. But there was no denying the connection that had grown between them over the weeks, the quiet moments of shared curiosity, the long conversations about life and survival, and the unspoken understanding that lingered between them now. "All right," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But this has to be on your terms." Kelly nodded, her resolve unwavering. She had spent her life in pursuit of knowledge, driven by logic and reason, but now, as she stood on the precipice of something far more profound, she realized that there were some things that couldn't be understood through observation, some things had to be felt. The couple in the next room laughed softly, oblivious to the weight of the decision being made on the other side of the glass. And as Kelly turned away from the observation window, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and fear, she knew that her journey of understanding was only just beginning. This was no longer about science, this was about her, and it was about Ethan. The air in the observation room had changed. It was no longer the sterile, clinical atmosphere that Dr. Kelly was used to. It felt thicker now, laden with a tension she couldn't quite define. She stood motionless before the large one-way glass, staring into the chamber where the human couple laughed and whispered softly to each other. It was as if she were on the edge of something vast and unknown, a precipice she hadn't realized existed until this moment. The rhythmic hum of the machinery behind her became distant, a low vibration that barely registered in her mind as she focused on the human pair. Their hands touched, fingers intertwining as they exchanged soft smiles. The way they looked at each other, the way they seemed to anticipate the other's movements, it was unlike anything she had ever seen before. This was not the detached, mechanical interaction she had observed in other species, including her own. This was something intimate, something deeply emotional, and it both fascinated and unsettled her. Kelly had spent her life in pursuit of knowledge, driven by logic and reason. Emotions, in her mind, had always been an unnecessary distraction, a hindrance to clear thinking and precise action. The Kailak people had long since abandoned such things, focusing instead on efficiency and survival. Their reproduction was a clinical process, devoid of the messiness that came with emotional entanglements. It was better that way, cleaner, more controlled. But as she watched the couple, something inside her stirred. There was a connection between them that went beyond the biological function she had studied so thoroughly. It was more than hormones or chemical responses. It was something she couldn't quantify, something she couldn't reduce to numbers or data, and for the first time in her career, Kelly felt the limits of her scientific understanding. Beside her, Dr. Ethan Blackwell stood quietly, his arms crossed, his expression thoughtful. He had been by her side since she arrived on Earth, guiding her through the complex and often bewildering world of human behavior. He had been patient, answering her endless questions, explaining the nuances of human emotions and connections that she found so perplexing. But even he seemed different now, quieter, more introspective, as if he too felt the weight of what was happening. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the equipment and the faint murmur of the couple's voices through the glass. But the silence between them was not empty, it was heavy, charged with something unspoken, something neither of them seemed ready to address. Finally, Kelly broke the silence, her voice quiet but steady. "I've been observing this connection between humans for weeks now," she said, her gaze still fixed on the couple. "But I feel like I'm missing something. There's a depth to it that I can't fully grasp from the outside." Ethan turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "That's because it's not something you can fully understand through observation," he replied softly. "Human connections, especially the emotional ones, aren't just about what you see. They're about what you feel." Kelly's antenna twitched slightly, a sign of her growing curiosity. "Emotions," she muttered, the word tasting strange on her tongue. "You've said before that humans rely on their emotions to form bonds, to reproduce, but I still don't understand why. Why is it necessary?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. He had explained this to her before, but he knew that Kelly's mind was wired differently. To her, everything had to have a logical explanation, a reason that could be proven with data. Emotions didn't work that way. "For us, reproduction isn't just about survival," Ethan said, his voice thoughtful. "It's about connection. We form bonds with each other, emotional bonds that go beyond just a physical act of reproduction. It's messy and complicated, but it's what makes us human." Kelly turned to face him, her wide, reflective eyes searching his face for answers. "But why?" she asked again, her voice more insistent now. Why make it so complicated? Wouldn't it be easier to simply focus on the biological function and eliminate the emotional aspect? Ethan smiled slightly, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. Maybe it would be easier, he admitted. But that's not how we're built. Emotions are part of who we are. They drive us to care for each other, to protect each other, to form communities and families. Without them, we'd be little more than machines. Kellia fell silent, turning her gaze back to the couple. She understood the mechanics of human reproduction, the way their bodies responded to stimuli, the hormonal shifts that occurred during mating. But what she didn't understand, what she couldn't understand, was the emotional connection that seemed to enhance those responses. It was as if the emotions themselves were fueling the bond between them, making it stronger, more resilient. I need to experience it, Kellia said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by her statement. What? I need to experience it, she repeated, turning to face him fully. I've observed long enough. If I'm going to understand this connection, this emotional bond that drives human reproduction, I need to be part of it. Ethan's heart skipped a beat at her words. He had seen her fascination grow over the weeks, seen the way her curiosity had shifted from mere scientific interest to something deeper, something more personal. But this was unexpected. Kellia, he said slowly, his voice cautious. You're talking about crossing a line. This isn't just an experiment anymore. What you're asking for, it's personal. I know, she replied, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. But I need to understand it. I can't fully grasp this connection unless I experience it for myself. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had always admired Kellia's dedication to her work, her relentless pursuit of knowledge. But now, standing in this small, dimly lit room, he realized that this was no longer about science. This was about her, and it was about him. Are you sure? He asked softly, his eyes searching hers for any sign of hesitation. This could change things between us. Kellia met his gaze, her expression calm but determined. I trust you, Ethan, she said quietly. If I'm going to cross this line, I want it to be with someone I trust. Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. The sterile walls of the observation room seemed to close in around them, the distance between them shrinking with every passing second. This was no longer just an intellectual pursuit, this was something far more profound, far more dangerous. And yet, Ethan couldn't deny the pull he felt, the unspoken connection that had been growing between them since the day they met. All right, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But we do this on your terms. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, we stop. Kellia nodded, her decision made. Agreed. The tension in the room shifted, the air growing thicker as they both processed what was about to happen. Ethan took a step closer, closing the distance between them, his eyes locked on hers. He could see the curiosity in her gaze, but there was something else there too, something deeper, something more vulnerable. She had spent her entire life behind walls of logic and reason, and now those walls were beginning to crack. Gently, Ethan reached out, his hand hovering just above her arm. May I? He asked softly, giving her one last chance to change her mind. Kellia's antenna twitched again, but she nodded, giving him silent permission. His hand made contact with her cool skin, and a shiver ran through her body. It was such a simple touch, but it felt electric, as if the air between them had suddenly come alive. Her pulse quickened, and she felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest, a sensation she had never experienced before. Ethan stepped even closer, his other hand resting lightly on her shoulder. He moved slowly, carefully, giving her time to adjust, to process what was happening. Kellia's breath hitched, her mind racing as she tried to categorize the flood of sensations rushing through her. This wasn't just a physical reaction, there was something else here, something emotional, and it was overwhelming her senses. This feels different, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. It's supposed to, Ethan replied, his voice low and soothing. It's not just about touch. It's about trust, about connection. Kelly's mind was spinning, her carefully constructed world of logic and reason crumbling beneath the weight of what she was feeling. She had never been vulnerable like this, never allowed herself to be. But now, standing here with Ethan, she realized that this was exactly what she had been searching for, an understanding that went beyond science, beyond data, an understanding that could only be found in the messy, unpredictable realm of human emotions. Slowly, Ethan leaned in, his breath warm against her skin. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his lips just inches from hers. Kelly nodded, her pulse racing. "Yes," she whispered, though her voice was barely steady. And with that, the line between observation and experience blurred, and Kelly stepped fully into the unknown. The room felt impossibly small, as if the walls themselves were closing in, trapping the heat between them. Yar. Kelly stood just inches from Ethan, her reflective eyes wide with curiosity and something else, something deeper that she couldn't quite name. This was no longer an academic experiment or a controlled observation. It was real, tangible, and for the first time in her life, she was about to experience something she had only studied from afar. Her iridescent scales shimmered in the dim light, catching the soft glow from the nearby control panels. She shifted slightly, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of the conflicting emotions coursing through her, fear, curiosity, anticipation. They swirled together, clouding the precision she was so accustomed to. The cool logic that had always guided her seemed distant now, replaced by a growing warmth, a pull she hadn't expected. Ethan stood before her, his expression calm but searching. He had always been patient with her, guiding her through the complexities of human emotion with a steady hand, never pushing her too far. But now they were both crossing a threshold they couldn't retreat from. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world outside the room disappeared. It was just the two of them, standing at the edge of something unknown. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked softly, his voice low and filled with concern. Kelly hesitated for a brief second, her antenna twitching as she processed his question. But the uncertainty that had briefly flickered through her mind was gone now, replaced by determination she hadn't expected. She nodded, her voice steady when she finally spoke. "I need to understand, Ethan, and I trust you to help me." He inhaled deeply, his chest rising and falling as he took in the weight of her words. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he was testing the boundaries of this new dynamic between them. His hand hovered just above her arm, waiting for her permission. "May I?" he asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. Kelly swallowed hard, her heart, or whatever the Kylok equivalent was, pounding in her chest. She had never allowed anyone to touch her like this before, not with such deliberate intent. In her culture, physical contact was rare, reserved for necessity and practicality. But this was different. It was charged with emotion, and that made it unpredictable. "Yes," she whispered, her breath catching as she spoke. Ethan's fingers brushed against her cool skin, and the sensation was immediate, electric. A shiver ran through her, starting at the point of contact and spreading outward, igniting every nerve in her body. His touch was warm, far warmer than anything she had ever felt, and it left her breathless. She could feel the heat of his hand as it rested lightly on her arm, the soft pressure sending waves of sensation through her. Kelly's mind raced, trying to process the flood of stimuli. This was more than a physical reaction, it was something deeper, something primal. Her body responded instinctively, her skin growing hypersensitive to the faintest touch. It was as if her entire being was attuned to him now, drawn to the warmth of his presence in a way she had never experienced before. Ethan's hand moved slowly, deliberately, his fingers tracing a path down her arm. Each movement was careful, as if he was aware of the significance of this moment. He watched her closely, gauging her reactions, his own heart pounding in sync with the unspoken tension between them. "How does it feel?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with curiosity. Kelly swallowed hard, struggling to find the words. It was difficult to describe this intense, overwhelming sensation that seemed to take hold of her entire body. "It feels different," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I didn't expect it to be so intense." Ethan smiled faintly, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder now. "That's because it's not just about the physical," he said quietly. "It's about the connection, the emotions that come with it." Kelly's breath hitched at his words, the connection. She had spent her entire life distancing herself from emotions, viewing them as distractions, weaknesses. But now, standing here with Ethan, she realized just how wrong she had been. There was a power in this connection, a power that transcended the cold, clinical logic she had always relied on. Ethan's other hand moved to her waist, his touch gentle but firm. He pulled her slightly closer, their bodies just inches apart now. Kelly's heart raced, her pulse quickening as the warmth of his body radiated into hers. The closeness was both exhilarating and terrifying, a mix of sensations that made her feel more alive than she had ever felt before. Her hands, which had remained at her sides, trembled slightly. She lifted one, hesitating for a moment before placing it on his chest. His skin was warm, firm beneath her fingertips, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It pulsed in time with hers, a constant reminder of the connection they were building moment by moment. "This is unlike anything I've ever felt," she whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. Ethan leaned in closer, his breath warm against her cheek. "It's just the beginning," he murmured, his lips brushing softly against her skin. The sensation sent a jolt of electricity through her, and Kelly's entire body reacted instinctively. Her eyes fluttered closed, her breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps as she surrendered to the moment. This was no longer about understanding or observation, it was about feeling, about letting go of the barriers she had spent her entire life building. As Ethan's hand slid down her back, pulling her even closer, Kelly felt the final walls around her begin to crumble. She had always prided herself on her control, on her ability to remain detached and logical in the face of any situation. But here, now, with Ethan's touch igniting a fire inside her, she realized that control was an illusion. There was power in vulnerability, in allowing herself to feel deeply, to connect. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Kelly wrapped her arms around him, pulling him closer still. The warmth of his body against hers was intoxicating, and she could feel the tension between them rising, building into something that neither of them could contain. Every touch, every breath, every movement seemed to draw them deeper into the uncharted territory they had both chosen to explore. And as they stood there, wrapped in the heat of each other's presence, Kelly knew that she had crossed a line she could never return from. But instead of fear, she felt something else, freedom. For the first time in her life, she was free from the rigid constraints of her logical mind, free to feel, to connect, to be human in a